Hello everyone and welcome to the second development video for Cantata. I'm Kyle, I'm the lead designer and programmer of Cantata at After School Studio, and I'm excited to sit with you again and walk you through some of the progress I've been making over the past month since the last video. As a reminder, you can wishlist Cantata on Steam, you can join us on Discord to talk about the game. We also have some forums that are pretty quiet, but hopefully we'll have some more people kind of joining over time. And also, I think I already said this, but wishlist the game on Steam. Yeah, so I just want to get into basically what's been going on with Cantata for the past month. The first thing to say is that the coronavirus really hit. So all my plans for GDC were basically scrapped, and I, luckily enough, live in New York, so I was able to kind of last minute reschedule my plans and went to PAX. I wasn't really showing Cantata, but I was showing it to some people to see if anyone was interested in potentially backing it. So it was really productive in that way. I got to see some cool games and met up with some cool people at the conference as well. So that happened. So all of my GDC stuff got scrapped. But in lieu of that, it means I get to spend kind of more time just working on the game through March instead of planning on being away for a week. So I'll jump into the game though and show you some of the stuff that's been changing. And I'll kind of start with things that are smaller and sort of work up to some of the bigger stuff that shifted in the past month. And so the first thing, nothing is immediately necessarily different unless you've looked at the game for a while. And what I want to point out specifically is this. So there's basically a background grid behind the map now. I can also highlight it for you just to kind of show you what it looks like a little better. So if I go into my map here and I go down to the shader, if I change the color here, you can see. So obviously it's not going to be that bright in the game or be too distracting. So instead I opt for something that's a little more subtle, which is like that. Before, when you would play the game, it was just totally black, which is like cool, but it's nice to be able to really see the bounds of the map. So if I go over here, I can tell that this is the last square or diamond or whatever. Here's the top. It's also easy to not really lose my position. So when I was here and I was trying to move back up this direction to view this area that was highlighted, I could kind of tell that I was moving in space. Whereas before, if like neither part of the map was on screen and I would like move the camera around, it was really hard to tell that anything was happening at all, and it was easy to get disoriented. I also want to talk a little bit about like how to do that, to draw this actual thing. This is like a devlog, so let me know in the comments if this is a little too deep for you or you want something more deep or lighter. This is the second video, so I'm just trying to figure out how I should do these things. So I wanted to share kind of how I ended up doing this. So I thought it was kind of interesting. And if someone's making a tactics game or something similar, you might be interested. So the major thing to note is that in Unity to do this, I'm just using one instance of Unity's line renderer, but specifically I'm using a line renderer with almost 500 positions. And so what I'm doing is, because of some limitations of Unity's line renderer, I essentially need to draw a background grid that is as if I put a pencil down and sort of never picked it up. So I have to kind of effectively draw a grid in the best way possible without kind of like wasting or doubling up where I could. So I'm going to show you how I chose to do that and some of the limitations. So I'm going to pop over to this grid in Photoshop and kind of show you what I did. So an easy way to think about how to do this would be to basically, draw a square and then draw a square and then draw a square and kind of do that for every square, which like theoretically is possible. But the issue you run into is that you want to do this in code. So trying to get your code function to like understand that you draw a square and then you move over one here and then you draw a square here and then you have to move over from one there. That's not really great, especially once you get to the edge of the map. So how do I know when I get here? Imagine I draw this square, this point then goes over there, right? So you're like, yeah, so maybe that's not so hard to just kind of draw squares and then, move over to the next row. But the issue in Unity that I found was that, again, you want to basically draw the line in one single pen stroke, because if you go from here to here, what will happen is that Unity will actually draw that line specifically. So you can't just pick up the pen, so to speak, and move it over here. What it will actually do is that it will actually assume that you stopped here. Whoops. And then it's going to literally draw a line over here and then start drawing again. And we don't want that, obviously, because we're going to have a big line through this thing. So you might ask, what do you do? And I'll show you what I did. So what I did was, I'm still getting used to this pen, so, bear with me. We're learning this live. This is what I did. Kind of figuring out a way to like programmatically draw this line. The way I sort of figured out how to do it would be to kind of like snake through the whole thing in a way that is deterministic and then also means that the pen never has to leave the ground. Because again, Unity's line renderer can't have gaps in lines. So you have to kind of draw everything as one line. So what I did was do something like this. I basically would draw all the way to here, and I go down here, and then I draw all the way over here, and I draw all the way over here. And now I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to watch me do this whole line. And so once I get to the end here, instead of, obviously I don't have these vertical lines yet. So what I do in this moment is that I then I start snaking back the opposite direction. And so now I'm going to finish this little line here. And so now if you look what we've got, I've basically done the whole thing. So it's a little sloppy, sorry about that. But you can see that not only are all of the inner sort of squares made with lines, the edges are also kind of implicitly solved. So what I've got by doing these snake lines, I'm actually kind of like drawing the full edge, whereas before I might have skipped it or something. I think in the actual code, I end up kind of going around the whole edge of the map one more time once I end like over here or something, just to make sure it's all spoken for. But what that does is effectively by snaking over the map in two different directions, I'm able to draw that background grid. And just once more to show you the result, I'm going to change this color to be brighter. And so you can see it works. That's the background grid. Happy to answer more questions about that on the forums or the Slack or the Discord or whatever. But I want to start talking about the next thing, selection borders. So selection borders are one of those things that exist in a lot of strategy games that are so kind of prevalent that you don't even really think about them. Here's an example from XCOM. This yellow line here is showing you basically the movement range of this unit that's selected. And just by clicking that, you kind of understand what the unit can do from that context. But this stuff is not necessarily easy. It's usually so well implemented that it's hard to even notice. Another example is like in Civilization 6 or something. Any like borders like this around the edge of these tiles, I would consider a selection border. Borders in general in strategy games, we got another blue one here, are just like a thing, right? Most strategy games have some concept of a border and have different ways of going about like visually displaying those borders. If we even look at like Europa Universalis, this whole game is based on borders, and so it spends a lot of time to render borders of different kinds and different types. This is Crusader Kings, but there's these borders here that are bordering different provinces and so on and so forth. So I knew that I wanted something like that in Cantata, and honestly, I was like, didn't do it for a while because it was kind of scary to work on and I didn't really know how to do it. So I'm going to show you that I did do it, and also like kind of a lot of the other latent sort of potential that comes with getting kind of like a generic selection border class to be able to be implemented. So I'm going to show you what it looks like and then talk about a little bit of the background. And to do that, I'm actually going to create a scenario really quickly just to also start showing people more of the editor tools. So I'm just going to create a small little 50 by 50 scenario. I'm just going to, let's put some different terrain down. I kind of like this field one here. So I'm just going to cover that in field. I can also mix up the tiles a little bit by maybe grabbing a different tile here and then I'm using the keyboard, changing my brush size and then making it be a little more sparse. So it doesn't look terrible. And then maybe adding a few little sort of like hints of trees or something. And I'll save this as borders. And I'll pop back into there. Now the map is ready to go. Oops. Oh, I didn't put a unit down, so I can't see anything. So I'm just going to go back there and fix that really fast. So I just open the map again, and I'm going to place down. Let's place down a base node. I'll place down just 2 of these little units. Borders. Oops. So open that back up. So there we go. Oh, the map the map background is still really bright. I'm going to change that before we get going again. Something a little darker. I don't remember what I had it at before, unfortunately. Let's put it right there. Okay, so that's more reasonable. So what I mean by borders, so before, if you look at the old video, I'm going to pull up a little clip of that now. You can see when I like select something, it's just like red, and then even looking at the movement range is kind of weird. The tiles are all being colored, which makes sense in some senses, but if you're having to show and kind of like preview a lot of different ranges of different things, it can be very easy to sort of try to put too much stuff on one tile. And that can kind of put your sort of readability of the game at risk. So what I do in Cantata now instead is that, and I'll zoom in here, when you mouse over something now, it actually will show the border in blue of the thing that you're previewing, which is its movement range. So if I preview these two, I'm just mousing over these. I can see their ranges, both for movement, and then the red is the tiles that they can attack. If I mouse over this building here, it doesn't have any sort of blue or red range, which means that it can't attack, nor can it move. Another thing I added in the most recent builds was the ability to have this little nice white selection outline. So when you're hovering something, it's kind of more easy to tell what you're hovering. When you select it, a few things happen. The first is that the outline will turn yellow, but then also what it does is it changes the actual border around the edge of the character to indicate that it's selected. When I move off that tile, I can then start previewing another thing, which that white range is specifically the range, the movement range of that unit once it moves. So this is a really nice way where if I'm trying to figure out, oh, on the next turn, I want to be able to move somewhere in this area. By mousing over my potential movement spot, I can see sort of like where I can potentially go. Another thing that I'm doing here that's also added in the new build is that, as you can see on the cursor, I now have a little arrow to indicate where something can move or can't move. So right now, if I'm moving out of here, I can tell that I can't do anything. But if I move in here, the little blue arrow appears to indicate that I can move. I think also if I try to move, let's just do a little move. So I'll move up a little bit. And so once I move, I can tell that the unit has moved, and I can then deselect it if I want to. So I can select another unit and move. And I'll show you one more thing that's kind of interesting that I've done. So on top of being able to move units now, another thing you can do is when you are trying to do an action at all, before in the game, and I showed you this in the past video, you'd have to click a unit and then press a hotkey or a button down here in the UI to be able to move. And now all that stuff just happens on click. So I can just click here, and then I move. It's much less finicky than how it used to be. It makes the game feel just lighter in general. It's also the same for attacking now. So if I had a unit there that I could attack, I could just click my unit and then click here and it would attack. And actually, instead of just talking about that, I'm going to demonstrate a little more of the flexibility of the editor. I'm just going to build a sample unit over there. And I'll pop back out of here and then show you what that means. So I can see that this unit's in the range of that unit, but I'll just move here. And then if I click here and then click this building, or click this enemy unit, I'll attack it. So yeah, that's really nice. Another thing I can do is if I move here, if I'm trying to move a unit and I try to mouse over another unit, I can see what that unit can attack, and it also dims my movement range. So I can tell, looking at my current movement range and the attack range of an enemy unit, kind of like what are good valid tiles that I could move to and not be in attack range. So I can see here that this tile looks pretty good, because if I mouse over this enemy unit here, I can tell that I can just move right there and be fine. Maybe attack him next turn or something. And so the system looks like pretty simple, right? Like it's pretty easy to see, like, okay, well, I mouse over a unit, I can see where it can move, and what's so great about that. But some of the stuff that's kind of unlocked by being able to have sort of like a generic class that allows you to draw lines. So I use this for movement, but I also use it for this other thing that I did this past month that's been kind of like really nice, and I'll show you now. So before, and I'll bring up the old video here, when you wanted to place a building on the map tiles would basically go red if it was an invalid area, or green if it was a valid area to place something in. The kind of the underlying rules of the placement of infrastructure, as I call it, hasn't changed, but I've changed kind of severely what it means and looks like when you actually place a building. So if I pop back to today and I highlight this drone factory to place, so I can see a few things are already happening now. The first is that instead of all these tiles that are potentially valid placement locations being green, any valid placement location is just a normal tile. So what that's essentially saying is like, I can basically place anywhere. Where I can't place though is where things are red. So if I go over here where this is red, my building goes red and I can tell that I can't place in that area. I can also tell by mousing over that, this little range here, that red building that also turns red, that's not the building that I'm trying to place down, is the building that is blocking me from building there. So another thing that's happened as part of this sort of restructuring of the last month or so is that I now have kind of more information about what's preventing me from placing somewhere. Whereas before it was like, any tiles that you can't place on are just red, and that they're just red and you have no really idea why that's the case. Now I can tell that when I mouse over this building here, I can't place this building here because it is in the range of this other building. In Cantata, what that range basically is essentially like I call it like a buffer range, but what it basically means is that any building that you place, you can't place another building closer to that building than that range. So right now I can see that my base node's got that range of about 3 away from it, and the building I'm placing right now has just a range of 1 around it. So if I was to place this building here, I can place another building relatively close to it, whereas this building that's blocking me right here blocks a bigger range. So I can show you kind of more permutations of that. If I place down this processor plane here, another thing to point out too is that I also can't place it down where something else that's already placed is inside of my range. So this is kind of a weird situation, but if I mouse it over here, not only is this base node in the range of the building that I'm placing down, but I'm also in the range of that. So it's just not a good place to place it. But I could place it here, for example, instead. Another thing to note is more cursor changes. So now I can see that the green cursor is pointing down to say that that's a valid placement location. Whereas if I place it here, it's got a little strike through. Big shout out to Into the Breach here. I was looking at their game a lot, or Subset Games' game a lot, and was getting a lot of good ideas for sort of contextual cursors and just doing a lot to kind of really show the players what's possible in a given moment. So I'm going to place that building here, for example. So I'm out of AP now. That doesn't totally matter, but I'll end my turn anyway just to make the little indication go away. That guy just shot at me, which I forgot I was in range. So I can see that needs supply, but I won't worry about that. I still want to focus on showing you infrastructure stuff. So if I go back to place that drone factory, so another thing has happened now. So before, instead of there just being sort of like a single range for each building, again, I have this sort of generic tile outliner class. So I can pass the sort of collective group of these two buildings, and specifically the range around them that can't be built. And then I can just combine them into sort of one line. So when I click this building, I don't see sort of like a lot of little lines in between here to designate, what tiles belong to what unit. I just can at a glance really quickly see that if I build outside of this range, I'm good. However, if you do want to see that, so imagine that I mouse over here. When I mouse over into this area, I can see the building that's blocking me, and I can also see its blocking range. So what's nice about that is I can actually preview now that I'm over here in this other building's range, I can see that that's the building that's blocking me from building here. And if I was mousing over here, I can see that this base node is blocking me from building here. Effectively, though, when you're placing a building, you just have to think about sort of the kind of the collective range of those objects, which is really nice. But if you really want that sort of granularity of understanding why you can't place something somewhere just by mousing inside of that range and trying to place something there will show you basically what building is attacking you. Another thing to kind of note now is some of the changes are starting to filter through with how I show and display what sorts of supply gets to what buildings. So right now when I'm trying to place this building, what it's specifically showing me is that base node object here has the ability to give me that specific supply type of that little icon that's appearing between the two buildings. Something else happens. So if I place this building and in my turn, I'll be able to see another aspect of this, which specifically if I place this down, I can see that I can get those other two supply types from that building. Again, here you can kind of see some of the supply blocking stuff. So if I'm trying to place right here, I'm sorry, but if I try to place right here, I'm in a valid location. But if I move one up, even though I'm outside of this bigger range here, this building I just placed down is inside the range of the building that I'm trying to place now, so I can't place it. But if I do place a building like this here, and I end my turn, and I click this drone factory to build, so you can see there's basically two lines appear now. The one that's going towards the building that I'm trying to place is telling me what type of supply that thing takes, and the one going out of it is telling me what type of supply it could potentially give to that building that it's pointing to. So what this does is it's starting to get at this sort of idea of making where you're placing buildings in any given moment kind of like give you a better understanding of what the potential ramifications of that building's placement are. In the upcoming builds, I'm going to actually change these symbols up here to indicate what type of supply that building needs based on what's being built in that given moment. But for now, you can start to sort of see. So if I'm trying to place this building here and I can see that little supply icon appearing between this building and that orange building to the right, and that icon matches the icon that's floating above that orange building, I probably have like a good sense as a player that that icon is what that building needs. So if I place this building here, I have a pretty good sense that this building is going to connect to this building as well. So yeah, so that's kind of like I've been going for a little while now. I might just wrap that up here. It's a good overview of what I've been working on. So a lot of stuff specifically around the sort of placement of buildings, like contextual cursors, working on tile outlines, working on surfacing supply and what it looks like better to a player. And then also plans changing around packs and GDC and like last minute rescheduling and stuff. But yeah, thanks for watching. Wishlist the game on Steam. That stuff really helps. Also, share it on social media. There's a link to my Twitter and the Discord below. Also, there's the forums. You can find us. If you look around, you'll find us on the internet. So again, thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you want to see anything else in the game, want me to focus on anything. I'm still trying to get a feel and get my legs for like how these things should go. If they're too deep or if they're too light, let me know. I'm happy to kind of like make these things be something that are videos that the community of people who are interested in this sort of game or this type of game will be interested in seeing more of. So again, thanks so much for watching. And I look forward to making another video in probably about a month or so. Talk to you later.